Todd is the founder and the group CEO of Overdose, and he is leading its global expansion. Todd, welcome to Groundbreaking Podcast, and thank you so much for joining me this week.
Thank you, buddy.
So I want to start off with some lightning round questions so my audience can get to know you.
Yeah.
What is the strangest food you've ever eaten?
Oh my God, the strangest food. I used to live in Singapore, and the first time I got fed durian, which is like this crazy big spiky fruit, and then inside you get these little kind of nuts that are then wrapped with this yellow fleshy fruit, and it kind of tastes like old socks, but some people really, really love it. It's just disgusting though.
What is the first thing you do when you get up in the morning?
Unfortunately, really, really bad habit is check my phone.
What is something we could not find about you online?
Oh, something you couldn't find out about me online. When I was your age, I used to have a really, really bad stutter. So, when you double speak everything.
Yeah.
So my parents took me to acting classes. When I was a really young kid, I did some really bad, cheesy TV adverts in like the 1980s. You might be able to find one on YouTube, but I don't know.
Do you know what they might be called?
No, that's as far as I'm going, because they're really embarrassing. My kids find them hilarious, though, when I showed them.
So what were you like growing up, and what did you think you were going to be?
So when I was growing up, my mum's like a teacher. She works with underprivileged and disabled kids, right? So usually kids that have been sort of thrown out from school, usually come from single-parent households. So I spent a lot of time with my mum in her workplace. You often find that, like back in the day, teachers used to take their kids to school because it was the safest place to be. And my dad was a scrap electrician, like a one-man band, and he used to go into businesses and strip those businesses down and break all the parts up. So I had this really weird upbringing of where one part of my parents were really deeply empathetic, and then my dad was really entrepreneurial. And I used to swing between all those things, and kind of growing up, never really had a spare moment and was always doing something. And even though I've put on a few pounds now, I used to love my sport and used to play sport to quite a high level, man.
Can you tell me about your journey before coming to New Zealand?
Yeah, sure. So I went and got a degree in product design. So that was literally designing products. And I had some really cool opportunities coming out of university to go and work for companies that, like a company called Mattel that would make characters, like action figures, right?
Yes.
And I used to love doing 3D design. That was like my specialism when I came out of university. But I also got offered a job at an investment bank, big American bank called Morgan Stanley. And they offered to pay off all of my student debts and to go on a different career. And I decided to go down that route because I had really big debts, because university was fun. And so I did a career in derivatives, options and futures, and learned how to code. Did a lot of fun stuff in that environment, got exposed to a big corporate world. That took me over to New York and got to see some really interesting things and like a different world that we'd never been exposed to before. After I'd done that for sort of like 4 or 5 years, I met my girlfriend, now my wife, and we went and did a year's traveling around the world because we'd never done that OE thing. So typically people tend to do that OE sort of when they're 16, 18. We did ours when we were sort of like about 24. And so I spent a year traveling around the world, backpacking, and we were broke when we came back. And we ended up going out to Singapore because my wife is a Singaporean, but she kind of went to university and lived in London. So spent a couple of years out in Singapore, and kind of in the same industry. We went over into private wealth management. Same thing, running big IT teams. When I was about 26, 27, I was running a team of about 60, 70 guys across Hong Kong and Singapore. And I had this kind of epiphany moment that I didn't want to work in a big corporate environment for like another 30 years, right, until retirement. And this is when being an entrepreneur was just like, I don't think the word really existed. People didn't really know what being an entrepreneur was, sort of 15 years ago. And what we did was we really wanted to come and live in New Zealand. So we'd traveled here when we were backpacking, and we'd honeymooned here. And we'd looked all around the world of where we wanted to live. And we were part of a really lucky group of people where all of the borders were open and you could kind of go and live and do anything you wanted in the world. Whereas if I look at my parents' generation, they didn't have those opportunities of free travel and just, setting up a life in a new country. So what we really loved about New Zealand was that it was a very diverse and open country, multicultural, but allowed us to be entrepreneurial and do some interesting things as soon as we could. So the first thing we did was we actually bought a restaurant, which was the smartest and dumbest thing we ever did. We were literally not looking for a restaurant. We were looking for any business that we could afford. And we only had a couple of $100,000 to go to spend. So we were looking at hostels and backpackers and tourist events. And we just accidentally found this little restaurant up in Russell in the Bay of Islands. And we went hammer and tong at this business. Like literally, we'd come from a corporate world of where I'd be wearing flash fancy suits to work every day and having big high-powered meetings. Just suddenly I arrived in New Zealand to what we thought was our dream, and I was cleaning the toilets and making coffees and doing beers and stuff. Now, what that allowed me to learn was a real sense of what small business ownership was really like, and it was a really rude awakening. Because you come out of these big corporate American banks and you think you're the big dog, you think you're the man, and then suddenly you kind of come down and get a really quick reality check on what life's really like. And I was pretty good at managing people then, but I was managing people in the banks that were really high-paid professional people that had gone through all their careers and had a life career that they were exploring. And when I went to own a restaurant, everyone that worked for us were casual staff and backpackers, and it was just a job. It wasn't a career for most of those people. So we had to learn real hard and real fast, and it was a real eye-opener, yeah.
What did you learn from the time in the hospitality business?
Yeah, so what hospitality teaches you, as well as that reality check that we just touched on, what it really teaches you is understanding the value of the cents on the dollar. Whereas I'd come from a world where people weren't interested unless you were talking in hundreds of thousands and millions. And all of a sudden I had to go and understand the margin of, do you do a bottle beer or a tap beer? What's the value of your table? How do you turn these tables? And you're working on such really tight margins in those environments that it's the genuine appreciation of the cents and the dollars set us up for the business we have today. And the other thing why I got out of the hospitality business was that once you had capped that business out, once your restaurant was full, and then once you turned your tables twice, there was nothing more you could actually do. So hospitality businesses are synonymously hard to scale. Right, so once you're full, right? Then you have to start going and doing massive investments if you want to go and expand that. So to go and buy the place next door and extend your lease and fit that place out, it becomes very, very big decisions to make. And they're also really fickle businesses as well. You can be the hottest, trendiest food for this season, and then next season no one's buying Japanese food, everyone's moved on to Korean, and then they're back to Italian, right? So I think what it taught me was a genuine appreciation of small business, a balanced view on where I'd come from to understand the pennies and not just the pounds. I still say pounds, I'm still British. Right? And off the back of that, what I managed to do with Overdose was combine my knowledge of tech and what I was really passionate about, but then also combine those learnings of hospitality. And I think the biggest learning there was I didn't really know what I wanted to do or who I wanted to be. So we were just starting a business in hospitality for the sake of having a business, right? It's not that we particularly had a passion for that particular industry. So what it did more than anything was it helped me find where I wanted to be and gave me a set of skills which I didn't think were that valuable at the time, but I now look back on it and it really set us up for a strong future, buddy.
What is your advice for people who want to leave their job and start their own business?
Oh, look, there's I think the biggest balance there is where you're at in your particular life, right? So I went through twice in my life where we gambled everything, where we went absolutely all in. Like when we had the hospitality business, we went down to the last $20 in the bank account. You know, it was tough. And there were times where you literally wouldn't have any staff and you try to do every job yourself. And you're working 18, 20-hour days, 7 days a week, right? So there's a lot of people that will give up a really solid career and just want to start a business because it's kind of the cool thing to do, right? If I was doing this again, I'd probably still follow the full path because I think through adversity brings out the best in people. And when your back's really up against the wall, you perform at your best, right? However, I'd have loved to have had a couple of $100,000 in the bank as a backstop, right? On the flip side of that, if there was a couple of $100,000 in the bank, I'd have probably have spent it and not been as wise with that money as well. Now, when we went and did that, we didn't have any kids. We didn't have a mortgage. We were just renting a home. So we'd kind of controlled what our own outgoings were there. So I think the advice for anyone is kind of pursuant to where you're at in your own individual life. And if you've got obligations and kids and mortgages, you need to ensure that you've got all of your ducks in a row so that you've secured their financial future. If you are in a fortunate position of where you've got your financial future locked down, or there's not that many people depending on you, go all in and go hard and go fast. What I've found, whereas I've had my most success, is when I've been truly, genuinely passionate about what I was doing and love what I was doing, rather than just chasing a dollar. And when we were in hospitality, we were just chasing a dollar, right? And so find something that it's a genuine passion. And what I tried to do with Overdose is build the job that I wanted first before building the business that I wanted, and have the lifestyle and the income kind of came second to that. And so with that passion and the desire to be in the role, and I don't want any other job. I want to do my job that I do today, right? And I think that's where the inherent success comes from. You know? But just be careful of what you risk and understand why you're risking it, you know?
Can you tell my audience about Overdose?
Yeah, man. So Overdose is what we call a digital commerce accelerator. Essentially, we work with mid-market retail brands to help them grow their company through a digital presence. So we started the company about 3.5 to 4 years ago now. So it's myself and Brian, who's my creative director. And we've grown that out from the 2 staff to around about 180 people now. Just this last year, Australia became our biggest market. So we have offices in Auckland, Sydney, Melbourne. We've got a little team of 6 people up in Singapore. We're just about to launch our business in New York. So we've done a merger and acquisition with the company up there that we've been working with for about a year. And we decided we'd really like to bring them into our family. And then we've grown out a team of about 70 guys in the Ukraine. So the guys in the Ukraine do a lot of our heavy tech lifting. So what we do is with these retailers that want to grow in a digital environment, I still run the strategy division of the business. So that's working with CEOs, CMOs, e-commerce managers, chairmen of companies, helping them understand what digital means to their business. And not just in a super high level, fairy discovery phase, but actually how you monetize those assets every day. And so that's looking at their consumers, it's looking at their brand, it's looking at how they do their physical retail, and then converting that into a digital journey. So what that typically means is we end up building websites, you know, so I guess we're a fancy website builder, but we only do e-commerce in that space. And then after we've built that website, we then help our clients through the search, the marketing, the automation, the AI, and essentially how you monetize this asset. So the other way of explaining Overdose is that we help you monetize your assets. And what we find is with a lot of these large retail chains, they've got a history of doing physical retail. They understand leases and malls and ERPs and stock churn, how to import products, where to find their margins. But with the rise of the internet and online buying, they've kind of lost that understanding of who their consumer truly is and really connecting with that customer in a deep and meaningful way. And not just to find new people to buy, but to keep the guys that are currently in your business buying as well.
How did you get your first customer?
Oh, how did we get our first customer? I think our first real customer that we closed was introduced through a personal network. So he actually helped us with our first lease and gave us free rent in his basement whilst there was only like 4 of us, and we gave them some free consulting. And he was running his own sort of management consultancy, and he had a few clients. He knew me from a previous business that I'd been involved with, and just injected us into his board and said, "Can you come and do some stuff in here?" So it was a very loose relationship. We didn't really know what we were trying to build or what exactly our services were, and essentially we started as kind of consultants where we just go in and do what was ever asked of us and just give our point of view and give our perspective on things. So we were quite fortunate in that space of where we managed to go to market just through a network rather than having to go and do mega advertising or anything.
How has your approach to running the team changed, and how are you retaining staff?
Oh, hey man, look, whenever I've recruited staff, and especially in the real early days, I was looking for those guys that had a crazy cool little spark about them. Right? And there's lots of guys who still work for us now who came in and we didn't really have clear job titles, and we were running around like headless chickens. But I was looking for sort of like this real passion and desire and grit and determination to build something big. So a lot of those guys ended up becoming, shareholders and partners of the business. We now have, I think it's now 13 shareholders in our business, and everyone is a director in the company. So everyone's active in that space. So the original attitude was hustle, 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 and look for people like us, right? What then happened as the business started growing out and maturing, we realized that actually we didn't need everyone with like a crazy type A, super entrepreneurial, super aggressive attitude. And we needed people that were a little bit more calm and structured and focused on that delivery. So I worked really hard to build a balanced team in that sense, both through personalities and skill sets. And we grew pretty fast. And so what that meant that there were a few people that couldn't keep up with our pace or didn't like that pace. And moving at that kind of speed, it weeds people out relatively quickly through that process. So my attitude hasn't changed to my staff, which is that we wouldn't be where we are if it wasn't for that team. Right. And it's a collective effort. And I've personally diluted my shareholding like over 30% to bring that talent into the business and make sure that we lock down and have awesome people around us all the time. So that attitude hasn't changed. There's just more of them. So we build a real family. We call it the Overdose family. We call our clients part of the Overdose family. There is one aspect of a personality that we really look for, which is accountability. It's people who get it done. They always deliver. They're always there for you. They're the ones that have got your back. It's the guy that you can turn around to, and he owns his own domain. But when you need a hand, he always says, "Yeah, bro, what's up? I got you." Right? And whether that's the most junior or the most senior staff, that's what we look for. We have had situations of where there's been more corporate staff that have come from big, high-flying backgrounds. And what tends to happen in there is that it stops being collaborative and collective, and they start to be more worried about themselves and their own career goals and stepping on people. They particularly, want the praise for something that was done, whereas we tend to celebrate as a group all the time. So we have lots of parties. There's a few drinks that happen, man. We socialize together as much as we work together, and that closeness and genuine love for the guys around you, I think that's one of our keys to success. And I think that also drives the retention. And the kind of people that work amazingly well in our business are the people that just love the business and they just want to be there. They want to be part of the story, part of the growth. Now, look, we have to do the cool stuff of having good parties, and we've got a much nicer office than we used to have. We've got basketball machines in the office. We've got neon. There's kind of Sega gun machines. There's ping pong tables. There's all that kind of cool stuff. But at the end of the day, that doesn't drive retention. That drives kind of just day-to-day happiness through the process. You have to pay good salaries. You have to do those things. part of what we're doing now, because we're starting to take on some investment into the business to drive some of our global growth, is later on in the year, we're giving 20% of the company back to the staff. So everyone starts to become a partner of the business, right? So everyone gets a shareholding in that. And then as we go through that growth, they'll get that equity in there. And are essentially, we want our guys, I want my guys to hang around, but I also want them to move on when the time's right as well. And if they've outgrown us, I don't want them to stifle their career and be a martyr to my business. What I want them to do, though, is that when they do move on, they look back and are crazy proud that they used Overdose as the launch pad for their career. So you don't want to always have retention. Sometimes you've got to, to love people, you've got to let them go sometimes. And I'm confident that there's been some amazing people that have moved on to other things, and staff will always leave at some point. But I reckon they'll boomerang back and they'll come back because they know what a cool kind of little setup that we are, man.
What's your biggest goal for this year?
Biggest goal for this year, launching New York is the biggie, right? This is something we've been working on for over a year now, and getting that off the ground. This damn coronavirus couldn't have happened at a worse time for us. We literally had launch parties booked and planned for April. It's going to be massive. Big trade shows booked, massive neons and background signs that we'd invested in. And now the whole country's going in lockdown, right? So I'm literally day to day, week to week going, what the hell? How do we move? How do we pivot now? But getting that brand activated and then getting recognized and known in that market. Right, so there's very, very few Kiwi headquartered agencies that have truly managed to break global. We're regionally relevant now, but if we can break the US and then break the UK, and people actually, when they think about our discipline of digital commerce, that they think the word overdose, that to me means I've cracked it.
I understand Singapore has been a difficult market. Why is that?
Yeah, man, Singapore's been a real difficult market for us. Look, I used to live there, and my wife's Singaporean, and I thought I knew how to do it, right? We thought we knew how to do it. We didn't necessarily make some of the right hires in that space, but we had the right team. We've got a crazy talented team there, right? What we found is that we work in the mid-market, so we're typically working with retail brands, right? They tend to still be mostly privately owned. We've got a few guys that are listed. And when we actually opened up, I don't think we truly did enough market research in terms of what our product offering had to be in market. We were always open that we had to tweak it and adjust it, but we didn't tweak it and adjust it enough, right? So we hit the big red reset button on that business at the back end of last year with this isn't working, right? We re-employed a new managing director. We brought in a new vision to that business. And over the last 3 months, we think we've just about got it working. We managed to get the pipeline cranking. We've just got new clients signing this week. It's like, okay, this is starting to work now. So we had to understand that market better. For us, that mid-market layer in Singapore doesn't exist. And that's what we didn't do our market research on, right? So what tends to happen in the digital commerce space there, you've got mega brands that come in, like your Legos and your Crocs and your Black & Deckers. And when they come into market there, they actually tend to outsource their entire business, right? So they literally have one person running their entire digital program on the ground, and then they employ an agency that gives them warehousing, distribution, marketplacing, platform, and had all these other services that we didn't particularly have. And so we picked the market wrong in the fact that there were brands that we could go and talk to, because there's not actually that many brands in Singapore that are truly Singaporean owned brands. They're all externally, internationally owned brands that then kind of license their products into those markets, right? We then started kind of exploring, right, we'll go down to the bottom end of the market and talk to the entrepreneurs, the startups, the guys that are starting to crack into things. And then we found that these guys just didn't have the budgets to kind of use a higher end consulting service. And they kind of wanted to buy a $5,000, $10,000 solution when we were trying to sell $100,000, $200,000 solution into the market. So we didn't pick it right. We also didn't understand what they like to pay for, right? So, and this is really weird, right? So in an Australian and New Zealand market, most of our clients want to pay for technical expertise, right? So they will pay not anything we ask, but whenever we put a quote out and we put, here's the money you have to pay for, super high-end programmers, never gets quibbled on, right? But what they will negotiate with us on is the designer, the strategy, the marketing, the piece after that. And especially on the strategy side, clients over here aren't used to paying for strategy. They're used to paying for execution. Now, up in Singapore and like that whole Southeast Asian corridor market, they are used to having outsourced dev. So it's done in Vietnam and India and the Philippines, where you can get this stuff done for 10, 15, 20 bucks an hour. And there's thousands of people delivering that service. So if you go and speak to a normal Aussie Kiwi brand, they will tell you that the best programmers are either Aussie or Kiwi programmers. It's not actually true. They're bloody good. But just because you're a Filipino or a Vietnamese or a Ukrainian doesn't mean you're any less of a programmer. But there's some sort of xenophobia that happens in that market. Whereas Singapore, being such a small little microcosm that's basically just a massive importer, Singapore doesn't really export anything. Everything comes in. They've kind of already built up that ecosystem. And we were trying to charge a lot of money for development, and they didn't want to pay it because they were used to getting it cheap. But then on the flip side, we suddenly realized that they were willing to pay mega money for strategy, right? And to actually get my time to sit in front of the board and coach people through an attitude and a process, identifying new opportunities, building them a roadmap, setting that destination, that's really hard to charge for that service here. You tend to have to give that away to get the execution style. Whereas in Singapore, they're actually really happy to pay for that, but don't really want to pay much for the execution. So we've almost had to kind of flip our business on its head, right? So look, it's I don't know the exact answer, but what we're doing is trying and testing and measuring. And certainly over the last few months, we've just seen that needle starting to flick. And I think we just need to keep on hunting, bobbing and weaving, and making sure that we're finding that right path to market.
How do you run all your international teams and keep the culture?
Yeah, man, it's really hard. Like, you asked me my biggest challenge for this year, and I said New York. Probably the second after that is retaining culture with growth, right? So part of my day-to-day job is, one, being the founder and the vision of the business, and the second is actually making sure that we stay solvent and that and that we're profitable and that we're growing. So what we did is we invented this thing called the blueprint, right? So every one of our offices is what means a federated business. Do you know what I mean by federated?
No.
Okay, so federated means that each one of those offices is kind of in control of its own destiny. Like, if you imagine that sort of Australia is broken into states, right? And each one of those states actually has its own governments and its own rules and its own laws. And then you have a bigger power, which is the federal state, which is that controls the whole country, right? So we only get to really think about Scott Morrison because he's the head of the country. But actually, when you go into Victoria, a lot of how that business is run is based on the state rules of that space. So we kind of started copying that model and saying, well, if I wanted to build a business in Melbourne, why don't we actually make the team that's in Melbourne wholly responsible just for that territory and build out local capabilities to do that, but also make the key members of that team shareholders in the bigger group. So they get to be shareholders in the group, but they've got to deliver in their own territory, right? Now, what that means is they're bought in to making sure that delivers. And so we have a 3-year plan of how we can kind of take any new market, take it from a one-man band, then up to a 12-man team, then a 30-man team, and then a 50-man team, right? And that whole process is what we call our blueprint. And what they have to do is they're still Overdose, right? And they still have to follow our brand. And we kind of make it that we are 60%, 70% the same across each office, but each office actually has its own culture, and that's based at where they are in that life cycle and who is the leader of that team. Because when you've got a team of just 3 or 4 guys on the ground versus a team in another city that's got 30 people on the ground, that genuinely has to be a different culture in each one of those. So I think culture is kind of variable, right? And we don't mandate it, but everyone's kind of bought into that same vision, man.
You've had 1,200% growth in 3 years. How do you even prepare for that sort of growth?
We just didn't. We literally hit it every month. So, not sounding like a real cocky prick, we were really disappointed with that growth. We wanted to go faster, right? We wanted to go much, much faster. There were opportunities that we didn't have the money to go and take, right? So we had to do, when we were opening up offices, we had to do them one at a time in series. If we'd had a bit of capital backing, we could have done that even faster and accelerated multiple parts in there. As a leadership team, me and the guys, we play what we call heads up management, which is literally every day, every week, we are readjusting and attacking for each of these pieces. Now, the one thing that we did smart is that we're a services-based business, right? So we don't scale very well. We're not like a product. We're not an app, right? So if you've got an app product and you go and add 100 times the number of people into your app, you don't need to add 100 times the number of staff to service them. Whereas all Overdose really sells is time. You know, some people say we sell attitude and ideas, but essentially what people pay for is time. So every time I sell an hour of someone's time, I have to go and employ that person to make that hour. So if you looked at the lines of our company in terms of growth and in terms of profitability, they're very close together. The lines don't particularly separate. So in a services-based business, you have two forms of income, traditionally. One, which is projects, which is here's 6 months worth of work that you've got to deliver. And then one, which is called retainers, which is every month you get you get a subscription amount, right? So we would sell 40, 80, 100 hours to our clients, and they would always pay us. Now, a normal agency tends to focus on those projects because that's where the really big cash is, right? That's the big $500,000 kind of deal that you've done. The problem is that if you do that deal on February the 1st, 2020, you've got to go and do that same deal on February the 1st, 2021. Otherwise, you're going backwards. So we initially focused on retainers, giving us continuity and consistent income rather than focusing on the big projects, right? So that meant that every time I go and sign a new retainer, I could afford to hire a member of staff. So essentially, we kind of grew those two lines together, right? And we never had to take debt into the business, and we never had to plan for that growth. And we literally hired staff as we acquired new business. And it's kind of, so it's like when we would look at our pipeline of new business, we'd go, right, we reckon we're going to win these 2 or 3 opportunities this time next month. Then we would hire the month before that, get that guy ready, speed them up, and then she's ready to rock and roll as soon as that business comes in. But the biggest key in there is structuring the business right, but also client retention, right? If we are losing clients and we're cocking up and not doing great work, and people move their business to one of our competitors, that moves us a step backwards. But I can't be the guy that just goes and fires someone, you know, like they're a piece of meat, because these are guys that are part of our family, right? So retention was key, making sure that what we've got is in good order and we're addressing that well, rather than always focusing on growth. So we kind of switch gears now and then, and there'll be times where we're crazy busy and we feel like, right, our service standards are under a bit of pressure here. Let's pull it back a couple of gears, and just controlling the growth so that it is sustained and successful.
In one sentence or 2 sentences.
Oh, I'm not good at 1 or 2 sentences, man. I just jabber.
Okay. How long? In the next 5 years, what do you want to happen with Overdose?
In the next 5 years, we will be a $100 million business with 30 offices across the world and recognized as the global leader in digital commerce.
Can you tell me?
Is that good enough?
Yeah, that's
Am I
good.
thinking big enough? You got to
Yeah.
think big. You got to think big.
Can you tell me a story as your best days as an entrepreneur and your worst?
Oh, Jesus. Best days as an entrepreneur. We had look, we have what we call a winning culture, right? Where we really celebrate our wins. And I think that there was a week last year where we closed 11 deals in 7 days, right? And you're going, damn, that was a lot of hard work. And suddenly everything came as, you know, this windfall. Turned out to be a pain in the ass because we weren't actually ready to onboard 11 new clients in 7 days, right? So it created massive stress in the business. When I get really, really pumped is when we get feedback that is completely unsolicited from our clients, right? So when you get a client that drops you a bottle of gin in the post and it turns up on your desk and it has a simple note that says, "You guys killed it. Thank you. You changed our business." That to me, that's the value add to me. You know, that's when it's amazing. The the worst days. Hey, look, there's months in this business because we have that seasonal flow of some of those projects. There's some really tough months in there, right? Now, we've very rarely been in a situation where we've had to lay people off, or that we've had those crunches, but we've had those days. There was a day when it was our biggest client at the time. They were around about 10% of our revenue, big Kiwi company, and they had a new CEO that came in, and they completely restructured their company. And even though we had a great relationship with them, new CEO, new board made this judgment call. We're internalizing, we're consolidating all of this business. And literally said, sorry, here's your 30 days notice. You haven't done anything wrong, but bye. And I had to sit there and go, what do I do? What do I do? Do I protect my people? Do I protect my investors? Do I protect my shareholders? Do I lay people off, or do I double down, right? And I went pretty deep and dark at that point, because I thought I was going to have to make some really horrible decisions of where you start affecting people's life. Now, look, there was positive that came out the back of that, because as a leadership group, it really brought us back together. And I think, like I said, with your back against the wall, you do your best work. In those darkest times, it really galvanizes your team around you, right? And we rallied around. And within the 30 days before they left, we went and found new business of double the amount that we were losing. And so it reinforced us to go there. So, whilst those dark days can be really dark, they tend to lead to some of the best outcomes. But it's really hard to see that when you're down in the dumps, man. Yeah.
Have you ever thought about selling Overdose?
Hey, man, look, we've been approached several times to sell the business, right? We are in a niche industry that won't stop growing, right? Online ain't going anywhere, right? So we are really confident in our own future growth of the business. We're also not content with where we've got to as a business. We're kind of about 25-30% to where we want to be on that 5-year plan. We were approached to buy the business when we hadn't got anywhere near like the value we needed out of it. But when someone puts 7-figure checks in front of you, man, it's crazy tempting, right? It's crazy tempting. But it's about backing yourself, backing the team through that process. So right now we're going through a process of bringing some investment into the business instead. And we'll be sort of combining our agency with a couple of other agencies to build a new group. So what we're actually doing is, it kind of feels like an investment, but actually it's us investing into a new body, and it allows us to diversify, and we get to kind of have access to some big PR companies, big brand companies. So it's kind of like a bit of a stock swap that we'll go through in the next couple of months. And that also gives us access to some VC capital to really make those big dreams happen, right? Because trying to smash out $100 million company and doing that off your own cash flows, that's crazy, crazy hard, dude, right? And you start gambling and risking your own home and your own kids' future and all those kind of things. We have been tempted, and we regularly get offered those temptations. And whilst we're a cool kind of hot company at the moment, it's always nice, and it makes you feel bloody good about yourself that other people want you. But at the moment, we're backing ourselves in for at least the medium term.
Reflecting on your journey today, what has surprised you the most?
What has surprised me most? I think what has surprised me the most, I guess when we were very, very early, how quickly larger corporates were willing to invest in small little hustle startups, right? So we managed to attract some banging Kiwi brands like Barker's and Merchant, Mipiachi, Nature Baby, all these kind of really cool Kiwi brands. And they were buying into us when we were like 3, 4, 5 people, and they should have been using big agencies, right? So the willingness of other Kiwi entrepreneurs and companies to back the little guy, and I think that's part of Kiwi culture, right? It's this underdog attitude, right? Of always having the back of those guys that are trying to really change an industry, being a bit insurgent and trying to push it in a different direction. So the speed at which people adopted our attitude, that really surprised me, that they were that willing to accept who we were as being just we're kind of weird, right? We're not a normal agency. We don't do things in a normal agency way. We did it the way that we felt was right, not the way the industry said you had to do it. And people really bought into it real fast. And that was cool, real cool, man.
Who inspires you?
Oh, who inspires? Look, I do this mostly for my kids. So I've got 4 kids. They're kind of between 8 and 13.
I know Izzy.
Yeah, you know Izzy. They really inspire me. I guess is that a combination of inspiration or motivation? I'm not sure. It's kind of a bit of both.
Mix.
Yeah. One of the things that I don't do is I don't read that much, right? I hardly look at my competitors, right? So I kind of had this weird thing that someone said to me once, which is that as soon as you're taking other people's thoughts and ingesting their thoughts, you start to become like them. So if you're always looking at your competitors and you're focusing on looking sideways all the time, you kind of lose where you're getting to and what your direction is and what your kind of goals are, right? So as a team, we tend to really internalize that look. We're really fault aware, and we've built this really deep self-awareness. So what's come off of that is that I get inspired by my guys who are in the trenches doing this crazy hard work every day, and their commitment and their dedication. And it's genuinely inspiring when you have other people that believe in your vision. That's kind of nuts, right?
Yeah.
That you say, I've got this big thing, I've got this big goal to get to, and then people come along and say, yeah, man, that's wicked. I want to come with you on that.
Really supportive.
How do we do that, right?
Yeah.
And actually, the fact that they give me their trust, that's crazy inspiring, and that pushes you to just go harder and higher, man.
If you could go back in time, is there any advice you would give yourself?
Oh, there was this one time, there was this chick. She was, no, you didn't mean that, did you? What would I give myself? Look, I think, I didn't have a privileged upbringing, but I didn't want for anything, I made some career choices, which I wouldn't recommend my kids would make. However, I look back at the opportunities that it opened up to me. And that's been really super cool. There are decisions that I've made, and one of the things I've learned is to make stronger, faster decisions, right? I would kind of bail out of some really tough calls and think, she'll be right. It'll get better. It'll get better. It'll get better. And there's times where I've waited 6 months to make that tough call and have that really tough decision. And then you realize it's cost you 50, 100 grand for not making that decision. So sometimes I would always say, trust your gut. And nearly every time when I should have made that call and then waited to kind of to see it out and got a little bit risk averse. So there's times where I trust my gut more, but I'm really pumped on where I've got to, the opportunities that have been afforded to me and the people I've got around me. And it's a journey, dude. It's not a destination. There's no end goal to this, right? Mm-hmm. And if I'm not enjoying it, then we're kind of doing it wrong, right? Doesn't mean it's not going to be stressful, but it's still enjoyable, and it's what I want to be doing. Yeah.
Final question.
Yeah, man.
What is one question you really wished entrepreneurs asked?
It's really simple. You just ask, so what? Right? So what? So I see so many brands that come to us and so many concepts.
My teacher talked about that in school today.
Oh, real?
Yeah.
I don't know him or her. Do I? No.
No.
Probably not. No, but genuinely, we see guys that come to us and present us this idea. It's like, we're going to do this. We're going to build a marketplace. It's going to be killer. And we go, it's usually, so the fuck what? So what? Right? And if it's genuinely not changing a market, right? And we see a lot of people who come to us and all they want is the coin, right? And they're chasing that coin. So I coach all of my staff to ask that question, so what? And if someone comes back to it and say, what do you mean, so what? I'm crazy offended. The reason I'm doing it is because of this, and this. And you go, now I get it. Now I understand where the vision is. And that question, because it's so jarring and it's so agitating to people, it brings out their passion in what they're doing. Or it goes the opposite way and you say, so what? And they'll go, yeah, you're right. It is kind of crap idea, right? And they move on, right? And I said, well, you weren't committed. You were just trying to bluff me through that process. So always call it. Always call it.
Thank you so much for joining me, Todd.
That's awesome, man.
If people are keen to get in touch with you, what's the best way?
Hey, man, I'm kind of on LinkedIn-ish, sort of, a fair bit. So find me on there. Search for Overdose Digital. You'll find us.
Thank you so much again, Todd. And to my audience, be sure to hit that subscribe button and share it with all your network.
Do it.
Sweet.